What's good, guys? This is Rio, and today I'm back in a Lexus LX470, 100 series Lexus Land Cruiser, a real Japanese icon, off-roader, body-on-frame truck, and we're gonna break down why this car is so special. So this car was really made to satiate the appetite of the more luxury-oriented dentist, lawyer, doctor who wanted a Land Cruiser but also wanted something a little more luxurious in the upboom of the Mercedes ML about to come out, the Cadillac Escalade. So as we're tapping into that territory and luxury SUVs are becoming a reality, Lexus, a fairly new brand at the time, obviously a subsidiary of Toyota, comes out with this beast in 1996, but in 1998, actually, the 100 series, which is what I'm in right now, officially came out. It ran all the way through 2007, and ever since 08, now we're in the 200 series, which has been facelifted a couple times, but has been around for a very long time. Now I'm gonna break this video down into 4 sections. First, I'm gonna talk about some facts and features surrounding this particular car. Secondly, I'm gonna talk about the Land Cruiser legacy of this car and of the both LXs and Land Cruisers. Thirdly, I'm gonna compare the LX to the Land Cruiser. And fourth, and maybe most important, I will tell you guys which one I think you should buy, in my opinion. Now, before we get into all that, we gotta do the most important thing, the thing that I'm trying to become shamelessly famous for, which is the Tallboy Test. And before I jump into the Tallboy Test, I wanna say one thing, which is that this car was made, or at least designed in the 90s. This particular one is an 06, of course, but this is a 90s car, and this is before the American craze surrounding cup holders and cubbies, and, well, you guys will find out for yourselves, but here we go, Tallboy Test. Alright, so for the facts and features, this puppy has a 4.7 liter naturally aspirated V8, good for 275 hrspwrs, good for 275 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque, all driven through a 5-speed transmission that's actually down here, which is awesome because this is an SUV and it's cool that it's down here in the center console. So yeah, this thing definitely has a good amount of power for a SUV of its era. It's not a quick car. It definitely doesn't even come close to competing with even a new base X5, GLE, any of those cars that are far more sporty. What it does give you is a decent bit of power for an older SUV. It definitely doesn't leave you feeling like it has a lackluster power plant, at least not in the post-03 models, which this is. We'll dive into that a little more later though. Speaking of the 4-wheel drive, this also has a locking center differential, which isn't quite as convenient as having locking front and rear diffs, such as what you can find in a Jeep or even now in the new Toyota 4Runners and Tacoma TRD Pros, but at least you have something to aid you in off-roading, particularly considering these are really meant to be, I love when I forget words, these are meant to be overlanders and not hardcore off-roaders or rock crawlers by any means, although some people do use them for those exact purposes. So growing up around SoCal as a kid, there was a ton of Land Cruisers and LXs all over the place. I actually spent a fair bit of time in these, whether it was a friend's parent or a family friend, just riding around. And I always picture these cars to be so large. But I parked this next to the Audi e-tron that I reviewed, which I'll link up above. And this was actually shorter, and I was kind of like taken aback. The length of this car overall was shorter than an Audi e-tron. So I did a little digging, and I found out this actually shares the same wheelbase as the original Infiniti FX35 and G35 sedan, which is like one of those mind-blowing moments. Like, obviously this is still a very large SUV. It has a very tall greenhouse and huge windows, and it's just generally a tall car and a very boxy car, but it's not quite as big as you may expect or think it is. I mean, I again was a little surprised parking it next to some bigger SUVs and realizing that, you know what, while it's very tall, it's not that long or ridiculous to manage. All right, now I want to jump into some of the cool features that this car has. So the first cool feature it has are TVs on the back of the headrest, which is just a gimmicky thing. You don't see it too often anymore, at least not in this sense where it's within the actual headrest. But it's cool. It's a cool 06 touch. The second cool thing this car has are the rear windows. And for the third row, they open out, like they vent open, which I think is just, again, another cool little touch. You don't see it that often. You used to have it in like the E46 3 Series. You used to have it in other SUVs of this era. The Expedition, I believe, had it, although I think that was manually open. This is electronically openable, or this opens electronically. But it's a cool little, like, again, early 2000s, late 90s touch that this car has. So moving on even further back in the car, there's a really cool spoiler, which I know this car is not really a JDM car, but the fact that it's a Japanese car originating in the in the mid 90s, late 90s, and the fact that it has a spoiler is something you almost never see in SUVs of this style, at least. Maybe you can find them in very sporty SUVs, Cayenne turbos and X5Ms and whatnot, but you never find in larger SUVs spoilers. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I don't often see spoilers on larger SUVs. This thing has a pretty funky little spoiler. Another cool feature is it has a split fold trunk. Now, speaking of split fold, one thing I want to mention is you got to be careful to not open the trunk and hit the ceiling of a garage and destroy your spoiler. But it is cool that it has a split fold trunk where you don't have to open the whole trunk to just access the top, and then you can open the bottom, which is basically a bench, very similar to the Range Rovers and the X5s. I love the fold down bench on SUVs. I know a lot of people can't stand the distance it creates between your body and the actual trunk space, but I love having that as a little ledge to sit on and whatnot, and I have to actually put my body up against the back bumper of the car if I choose to sit in the trunk. Staying out back, again, another cool feature this car has, which a lot of people don't like, but I think is still, again, cool and stands out, are the jump seats in the third row. So the third row seats fold up to the side instead of folding forward or going into the floor of the car as some SUVs or minivans do. These just go out to the side. You can definitely pull them out of their rails and completely remove them out of the trunk if you want more trunk space and you don't need the third row. But they're really cool, they're really funky, and when they do come down, they're a fun experience for kids to watch when they're gonna hop in the back. Now, speaking of the back and kids, the third row is not super big in this car. You definitely can fit someone around 6 foot tall for a short trip. I think I could squeeze back there, and I'm a little over 6 foot tall. But the second row is lovely, and despite having the same wheelbase as an FX35, this car still has a ton of second row leg room. I can easily and more than comfortably fit in the second row because these cars have exceptionally comfortable seats. Just in general, they're exceptionally comfortable. Lexuses always kill it when it comes to seats. So this car actually has a slight underglow feature, I know, going back to that little JDM vibe. So this car has pretty large running boards, and they're painted running boards attached to the car, almost like a side skirt. And on top of the running board, or towards the top of the running board, there's a light bar on both sides, 2 light bars actually on both sides. And that isn't the underglow I'm talking about, but that lights up the running board at nighttime if you unlock the car, for someone to be able to see it, illuminates the running board. But underneath the running board, there is a big, I think at least one on either side, maybe 2 on either side, puddle lights, but they're basically underglow and they create this really cool look at night. It is cool to have it on a car that's a little older and have it just be white light. Feels very special. The last feature I want to talk about before we get into the other sections of this video is something that I'm going to go onto the road for because it relates to the driving, steering, handling, suspension of this car. So let's pull it out and talk about the last feature. So that last feature that I was talking about is something that Lexus calls active height control, AHC, active height control. And what it is basically is a function in which the suspension in this car is actually hydraulic. So it's not air suspension where it can be punctured. It's hydraulic with oils and whatnot. And what that allows this car to do is switch between a comfort mode, then a couple notches over into a normal mode, and then effectively at the very far end of the spectrum into a sport mode. Now, that doesn't make this car exceptionally sporty, but what it does is tighten up the suspension quite a bit and not allow as much of a boaty feel over bumps or over speed bumps, especially in city driving. And it also makes the steering feel a bit tighter as well. Now, I want to jump into the legacy of the Land Cruiser and how they arrived at this particular car and then where they've kind of gone since this car. So the Land Cruiser, as we know it, originated around the 60 series. There were series before that and other styles of Land Cruisers that were more similar to Jeeps, but starting with the 60 series, it kind of became a full SUV. Obviously, it's body on frame, but It doesn't have that Jeep nature to it. It's definitely a normal SUV with windows and doors that don't come off easily or any of that. So after the 60 series, there was the 80 series. And that's really where the brand came together, meaning what the Land Cruiser stood for and what the car really is perfectly coincided. And towards the very end of the 80 series, they came out with the Lexus variant, the LX450 at the time in 1996, only ran for 2 years and quickly was replaced. Both the Lexus and the Toyota were both replaced with the 100 series, and that is what we're currently in. So in 1998, the LX470 and the Toyota Land Cruiser, always had the same name, but it was 100 series, both came out, and they effectively ran from 1998 through 2007, at least in the US. So this 06 model is unique because there were kind of 2 refreshes throughout the 100 series. So from 98 through 2002, the car had 230 horsepower, I believe a 4-speed transmission, and a fairly outdated interior. Then in 2003, they updated the motor to have 235 horsepower, I know, a whole 5 horsepower, and they also updated the interior to be very similar, basically what it is now. And I believe they also added an optional heads-up display that year, which is a very high-tech feature, I guess, for 03, while I will admit certain American cars have had that feature since the 80s. But to move forward, in 2006, which is the year this car is, they further updated it by giving it slightly updated headlights, I believe, and more importantly so, they added some extra airbags. I believe they have now curtain airbags up here, and they made it 275 horsepower. I did forget to mention that in 03 they changed it to 5-speed, so this still has the 5-speed. So 03 through 2007 was a 5-speed, but 06 and 07 were a whole 40 horsepower more. So yes, an 06 and 07 is kind of the sweet spot because you get everything that made the 100 series great while dealing with any of the BS of maybe a 200 series, which takes us to the future. So 08 and through 2020, still 2021 in fact, there is now the 200 series. It's been going on or been running for a very long time. They have updated it quite a few times, but the car underneath is basically the same as it was in 2008. But I really do like what the 100 series stands for, still having that more rugged and old school energy towards it and not being so focused on tech. While I will admit, again, in the 06 and 07 years, they did add Bluetooth and a few other things that do kind of keep it more up to date. Unfortunately, you can't stream music through Bluetooth, but you can accept phone calls. So that isn't very useful anymore. Nonetheless, this car has a hell of a lineage, and these are really known to run forever and forever and forever. This particular car almost has 200,000 miles, and I know of many examples that have well over 300,000 miles and are running great. The only thing is every 90,000 miles or so, you need to change the timing belt. I love the energy in which they last forever and forever, and it's kind of something we're moving away from as a society in the sense of subscriptions and leases, and that's all great. I mean, I'm not against any of that stuff. It's just that there's a beauty in being able to buy one of these brand new and keeping it for 20 years and having no problems with it, having no qualms, if you will. Okay, so now I want to break down the differences between the LX in general and the Land Cruiser. Okay, it's very simple, especially, and I'm going to focus particularly on the 100 series. They are effectively the same car. They're just a couple differences and then a bunch of cosmetic differences. So one of the only significant differences is that active height control that this car has is only an option on the Land Cruiser and may have not even been an option until 03, I believe. So that's one thing to consider. However, with that said, some people actually prefer, in fact, many people prefer the static suspension of the Land Cruiser, and the owner of this car actually did put the Land Cruiser suspension in the rear of this car. So it's a real toss-up there, but a difference nonetheless. And I think other than that, everything else is just cosmetic or luxury based. So yes, the leather's a little nicer in this. There's wood trim on the steering wheel and on the door cards, as well as in the center console. You do get a Mark Levinson speaker system. That is one thing to consider. That's not just cosmetic. That does make this car a bit nicer to live with. So this is a Mark Levinson speaker system. That's a real improvement. But yeah, again, everything else is cosmetic. The headlights, for instance, on this particular car are that separated or split design, very much so reminiscent of Mercedes-Benz. And I think that is obvious because Lexus at the time was copying Mercedes-Benz. Even the shifter is very Mercedes-Benz-esque. But other than that, the headlights are a little different. They kind of have that old school GS look. I love it, but they're a single piece on the Land Cruiser. The taillights are a touch different as well, and some of the body cladding and trim is a little different. The wheels are different, but look, the cars through and through, engineering-wise, chassis-wise, are almost identical. The same drivetrain, and yeah, I mean, they're almost the exact same car, so there's really not much in it. It's just a little bit more luxury oriented, nicer trim, nicer leather, a better audio system, and the standard active height control. But yeah, not a big difference. All right, and now we have saved the very best for last, which is which one I would buy, an LX470 or an LX in general, or a Land Cruiser. Honestly, I love the Toyota Land Cruiser brand, and I don't love the whole luxury oriented side of this because I don't think these are really luxury cars. These are overlanding trucks. So I'm totally cool. In fact, again, I like that Land Cruiser brand. And I think a lot of LX owners do as well. However, if you're buying or leasing new, definitely get the Land Cruiser because, again, I like it more and it's the cheaper of the two cars, and we've already gone through how it's effectively the same car, aside from slight luxury-oriented differences. But if you're buying used, in the case of a 100 series or even older, or a fairly old 200 series, these Lexuses are a good chunk less expensive. I'm not saying they're way less expensive, but for being the same car, with the exception of the Land Cruiser brand, these Lexus Land Cruisers are actually a bit cheaper. So this is definitely a good $4 or $5 grand cheaper as it sits 14 years old as compared to a same year Land Cruiser. So that's definitely food for thought. And with all that said, I'm happy to say that I love this car. It's a big time vibe. It's a Land Cruiser vibe. It's huge. Not really though, but it's really clean. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to tune back in for more. Like, comment, subscribe, do all of that. Peace.